see what can be unburdened by what has been.
You may clap.
Very strange times in the United States. We saw a former president shot, lives lost on July the 13th. The RNC named Donald Trump as their nominee. We saw Joe Biden ghost the country. He wrote a letter and resigned from the candidacy, which means that Kamala Harris has picked up the banner. And of course, accountability, it's not always in our time, but even Secret Service Director Kim Cheadle.
Ms. Cheadle, I'd like to remind you that you're under oath.
Has now stepped down from her post. It's a wild time. There's a lot of tumult going on. This is not the first time that America has gotten so rowdy. Stick with us on Between the Lines. July the 13th, 2024 was a time when this country changed forever in Butler, Pennsylvania. We also saw the underbelly of the news organizations as they tried to spin it. They tried to play like it was something that it was not. We saw an exposure of the failure of our government apparatus and the United States Secret Service. Everybody was on display. It's not the first time that we've seen an assassination attempt in America. The last time was what happened to Ronald Reagan in 1981. But even before that, the 60s were a time of great American turmoil. There was a churn that was happening. John F. Kennedy had been shot. Robert Kennedy had been shot. MLK had been shot. All of these great figures that we remember now and see in history books were real people. It's hopeful to me to think that this is not the first time we've gone through this kind of tumult and chaos. It's helpful to me to remember that America is still standing today, despite how it must have felt at that time. And they didn't have a 24-hour news cycle that was constantly feeding and pushing out conspiracy theories and pushing out clickbait articles about all of the things that went on. When we evaluate those historical shootings, there's always been these air of mystery because we don't trust our government. And whatever trust that government gained between the Kennedy assassination and Ronald Reagan's attempts and the glasnost and the perestroika and the openness that may have happened at the end of the Cold War, it's all been undone through the Patriot Act and 9/11, through the way that the FBI has been treating conservatives over the last 5 years, but all people over the last 20 years. They've lost some of this, and other government entities got in on the fray as well. The CDC, the FDA, they have lost the ability to say things and have us believe them just on their face. And that leads people spinning, looking for answers. Historically, people look to the church. In fact, in my lifetime, 90% of people identified as Christians in this nation. And so they would go to church and talk to their faith leaders. They would talk to their church communities, and they would get focus and redirection. We don't have a lot of that today. We have less than 60% of people identifying in that same way. So folks are going to the internet, and they're going to social media, and they're trying to find out, what do the talking heads say? What do the pundits say? What do my favorite conspiracy theorists say, whether it be an Alex Jones or a Stu Peters? They're out there in the world looking for answers because they lost that place where they would find them. What we should do is be aware that there's always been limited information in most of human history, and most people were still able to make decent decisions. How do you do that? You do it based on values, you do it based on a faith, and you do it based on knowing that God's hand is on all of this, and we are never going to understand it until well into the rearview mirror. People who know what I think about Donald Trump in my private and my personal life and my public life know that I'm not a cheerleader for anybody, but generally speaking, the man has better outcomes than the alternative. What we saw on July the 13th was a glimpse into his character that nobody could have predicted. You can't script certain moments in your life. There are moments that come at you so fast and so aggressively that every sort of pretense, every ability for you to act and play out some sort of fantasy role, it doesn't work. You go down, you strip away all that pretense, you get to a very, very raw state of human existence. And we saw that. Donald Trump had a bullet hit him in the ear. Others whizzed past him. He dropped to the ground for his life. You can see in moments that look like he's praying, he's covered by the Secret Service, and his instinct was to stand up and let America know that he was okay and the fight will continue. We also heard him give up his existence on the platform at the RNC to God.
I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God.
And there have been all kinds of reconstructions of how that shot may have taken place and how unlikely it was for someone to survive it. I think God had his hand on our nation, and we all got to see it. It's miraculous. That doesn't mean that we don't pray for the firefighter chief from Buffalo Township who perished on that day. He did so in a way that is also quintessentially American, a thing we talk about on this program a lot. Being a man and stepping into the gap when the moment comes. If you've been doing the right thing over and over, you do the right thing when nobody can tell you it's coming. We saw a man defend his family, and he died for it. And according to his friends, he would do it 10 times out of 10. That's a man that we should all hope to be like. And wives, you should be looking for husbands that do the same thing. This is really quintessential American stuff, which is why you see such an outcry and so much panic on the political left. And then we got a roster switch up. Joe Biden apparently had COVID and then broke up with the country via text message. I say that flippantly, but somebody tweeted out that he was no longer going to be in the race. The same guy that we've been hearing was great and strong and capable, and the same person that they were crying about after the debate because he was weak and frail and nobody told them. If you think that these machinations were not happening for the last several months, maybe even the last couple years, I think you're giving people too much credit when they say things that are false. So here's my take. They gave up on democracy right away because it was not expedient. It wasn't helpful to the purposes. As it was designed in our Constitution, we were supposed to have a change of ideas in government. And that actually happened in the Democrat Party. They just didn't do it with an election. And of course, they just shirked democracy, which they love to hold up as though it is some sort of virtue. The Democrats understand power. The people on the political left understand it instinctively as well. And when you understand power and you think that's more important, then the rules are sort of secondary. And what I think happened, and there's some pretty ample evidence of it, Kamala Harris worked in the background, made sure that all the pieces were in place. And in a perfect coup, what happens is you seize the government without a shot being fired because you already own all the things that need to go, including the person who sends out that tweet on the president's personal social media accounts. We saw a resistance from the United States Secret Service director to accept responsibility for a zero-fail mission. Her own words, a zero-fail mission.
The assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump on July 13th is the most significant operational failure of the Secret Service in decades.
And even she eventually relented and resigned. But facing an overwhelming headwind from both Republicans and Democrats, everybody can agree that having pot shots taken at political leaders in the United States is a dangerous situation. And we've been there before, and we know what sort of chaos ensues, and we know the weakness that it shows on the national front and on the international front. It's bad for this country. Now, the Democrats are never ones to sit idly by when there's unrest. They always let the crisis blossom, but they're going to take advantage as best they can. So what are we seeing? While everybody is worrying about the roster change on who's going to be taking the banner into 2024's election in November, you've got people like Elizabeth Warren trying to slowly undo the good that the Supreme Court did as it got rid of the Chevron deference. While everybody is looking at what the coach is doing, arguing with the referee, the players are still on the field and moving forward. This is not a time to take your eyes off the ball. This is not a time for us to be distracted by what's going on. We can acknowledge that the political left has moved on with a new candidate, as terrible as she is, and she is quite bad. We can see the Trump campaign had already anticipated her coming. In fact, we knew that she was going to be walking in because he already lined up his lines of attack, and there are many. She has to carry the banner, which is a burden of the Biden administration, a terrible economy, an open border. She was named the border czar of all things. So I relish a debate stage that has Donald Trump against Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris couldn't get 3% of her own party to vote for her in a primary. She wasn't able to win the state that she was a senator from during the last election cycle. And she's going to step into the big time. The only thing that she has going for her, the only thing is that she has the title of vice president now, so everyone's been watching her. But those of us who have been watching her are not particularly impressed. Her favorability ratings are low, and a lot of this can be directly tied to the policies that fought and destroyed the working class people at the lowest income levels, because they're now competing with an open border and illegal immigrants coming in able to outbid them or underbid them for work. Because the government's paying for their housing, the government's paying for their food, the government's paying for their cell phones, the government is giving them medical care. Imagine if you didn't have to worry about any of those necessities. Americans are starting to feel that squeeze, and there's only one group to blame for it. It's pretty clear and pretty obvious, and it was intentional since day one of the Biden-Harris administration. They're going to trade on that. I think we should hold them accountable to exactly what it was that they did. The outcomes are theirs. They get to own it. And now, unlike Joe Biden, who's going to forget what he did, we've got a new person. She's going to have to try to pick that up as best she can. All I'll say is this: God's hand appears to be on America. I think we saw it on July the 13th. That was a very dark abyss that we narrowly steered away from. And now people need to remember, God draws straight with crooked lines, things that are very difficult to understand in our own time. So a moment of prayer and thanksgiving for sparing the life of Donald Trump, a moment of prayer for the repose of the soul of those who have been injured, lost on that day. Even a prayer for Joe Biden, that he makes the right decisions as he leads this country for the last few minutes, that he makes the right decisions, whatever those are, and they're outside of my ability to guess. And a moment of prayer for the United States of America, great country that we hope will be made great again, and not just as a tagline, but because our children are in the balance, and because there are real consequences to having poor leadership and poor government. We can do better because we have done better. We expect them to do better. So let's pray that they do.